The Creator was directed by Gareth Edwards, who also directed films like Godzilla in 2014 and Rogue One, a Star Wars story. And this is a new science fiction movie that's going to be in theaters this weekend. In the near future, AI advances to a very extreme degree, and it's actually being very cooperative when it comes to human life and being able to coexist along with things. However, when a nuclear warhead detonates in Los Angeles, it causes humanity to go against AI and track down anything that could potentially have its own mind. Eventually, Joshua, played by John David Washington, is tasked to find a weapon that could potentially take AI to the next level and even beyond. And eventually, when he finds this thing, it turns out to be a child, played by Madeline Una Boyles. And it seems like this child, there's more to this than meets the eye, and now he has to protect this child. I don't want to give too much away because there's a lot of things in this movie that it's not really in the marketing, and so I kind of want to keep things quiet. But this is a movie that I was very excited for, not because of Gareth Edwards just directing, or whether it be John David Washington, who I think is a really good up-and-coming actor, or the spectacle that seems to be on display. It's also because right now we're going through a very interesting moment in cinema where a lot of original storytelling, non-franchise storytelling can often be a dice roll. And it's often difficult to try and tell people, hey guys, go support this new original thing if it's not something that is pre-established. And so to take a swing like this and have something that's new, it's already very interesting, and I want to see what you can bring to the table, especially with science fiction, because this is such a malleable genre. You can practically pull off anything in here. And so I'm very curious to always see what someone is going to bring to the table. Last week we had No One Will Save You, which was sci-fi horror, which had its own original beat to it. And having seen The Creator, I can't wait to see it again. I don't know how everybody's gonna respond to this movie because it makes some choices and some swings that are so big and bold that it may or may not land for everybody. But I'm curious to see how those reactions come in during the weekend. I can only speak for myself over here, and speaking for myself, I thought they did a really, really great job with this movie. It's not completely flawless. There's a couple of minor gripes that I have, but I was just amazed by what Gareth Edwards pulled off over here, especially when it comes to that spectacle. This is something that I've loved about all of his movies. He has a way of making things look as grand and as big as possible. And by that, I don't just mean like going over the top. I mean making us feel the weight of certain things. Like when something is towering above you, you can feel like that thing is towering above you. He did a really great job with Godzilla in that you really felt the size of the monster, and I still think that of that entire series, that's the movie that's done that job best. But then when you get to Rogue One also, especially when you're at the final fight that's going on, when the AT-STs are coming towards the other rebels, towering above you as they're about to stomp on you and shoot you down, it really is remarkable stuff. And once again over here with The Creator, everything feels massive. There's a ship in this movie called the Nomad, which is constantly going overhead places where there might be some targets. There's not a spoiler, very early on in the movie this is established. And every single time you see this thing and it has those beams light up so that it can pick some targets, it's constantly looking like this ominous thing, and you feel like that explosion that's about to go off from a missile that it launches is going to be extremely devastating. And that happens quite a bit. And the spectacle, like I've already mentioned, the scale is great, but also visually dazzling. This is an incredible looking movie, and Gareth Edwards does a great job of directing it once again. The cinematography by Greg Fraser and Oren Soffer is fantastic. Also, the sound design of this thing is a technical marvel all through and through. Like the way needle drops are done, which there's actually quite a bit of in this movie, but also when it comes to the action sequences, when it comes to more intense moments, like there's a sequence with a bomb. I'm not gonna go too much into what that is, but there's a bomb sequence, and I'm gonna keep it as vague as possible over here. And the way that sequence is conducted, there's no score. It's just shooting, timer, and footsteps. That's all I'm going to say about that. And you'll know what scene I'm talking about when you see the movie. The movie also has a score composed by Hans Zimmer, which I've seen some comments address as unmemorable. I don't think that's quite the right word for it. I would say it's more minimal. because there's definitely memorable moments, and there's definitely times when it really kicks in that you get the full effect of that, but it's not used as much as you think. Like the first half of the movie, it's barely in there. And then it kicks in more in the second half, and then the final act, it's really there. But yeah, it's much lesser than you'd think. It kind of reminded me of Widows. Like if you've seen Widows, which, great movie by the way, there's a point where the score really kicks in, but it's towards the end of the movie when the heist is going on. Before that, you don't get too much of it. You get some music here and there, some needle drops and all that, but you know, it really, the Hans Zimmer stuff is towards the end of the movie. There's kind of a similar pattern in that sense, and that's kind of what I'll say about that. The cast is also really, really great. John David Washington is awesome. I think he did a really, really good job here, as did Madeline Yuna Voiles, who plays this child that seems to have some abilities. This is an amazing performance, and I believe this is her first role, and I'm excited to see what she does in the future. I think she has a really great rapport with John David Washington, which is important because the relationship that is between Joshua and Alpha, as she's called, is something that drives the entire emotional crux of the movie, which can sometimes take a while to kick in. Especially the first half of the movie, you're not totally invested in yet. It takes a while to eventually build up, and then I think by the final act, it really, really does hit. Again, I'm curious if that happens for everybody. I can, again, only speak for myself, and I think they did a really, really good job with that. And the moments that you get with them, the quieter moments, were outstanding. And everything that you get with Alpha is great. The other cast members are pretty fun too. I think Ken Watanabe is awesome in this movie. He does a really good job too. The storytelling of the movie is also really, like I said, it's very unique. It's stuff that is taking parallels from stuff you've seen before, but it's doing something new with them. Like, I guarantee there's gonna be 3 or 4 movies that come up in everyone's conversations, stuff like Blade Runner, Akira, Dances with Wolves, even bits of Elysium in there, which came out like 10 years ago. There's definitely those sprinkles throughout the entire film, but it does its own things with that without necessarily, you know, trying to be like, hey, remember that movie? We're straight up ripping off from that. It doesn't have any moment of that sort. But what is actually the most surprising about the creator is how timely it is. We're constantly discussing these days about the advance of AI and how things have changed so drastically when it comes to how much has developed in that arena. And we constantly talk about what happens, you know, if we keep going down this road. And there's some questions that always are unanswered, like, what if this affects humanity in this way or that way? What if it becomes too self-aware? We've had movies address these things before, you know, even the Terminator movies, that's something that's a very important question. Like, you know, how far can you go with that? Like Skynet goes rogue, you know, and that's definitely a concept that comes up, especially now, because we're just having these conversations so much about it and how much we can integrate AI into stuff. And it also becomes a conversation when it comes down to working together with AI. Like, instead of trying to use a approach which is the other extreme, which is completely take over that, what if there was a way to make it coexist in the best way possible? These are questions that the movie raises, and it'll probably lead to some debate, and I think that's a really cool thing. And it's a very interesting thing to talk about, especially right now. The film also has a very interesting way of addressing current socio-political climates and, you know, the way certain things are working in society right now, especially when it comes to how certain communities are being addressed and treated. And especially when it comes to the AI community that we see in this movie. There are aspects of that feel very timely and unfortunately real and very brutal as a result of that. And this has been coming up in a few other comments when it comes to other reviewers that I follow, and it's definitely a big part of this movie. Like, the movie really wants to emphasize just how awful certain things are when it comes to society as a result. Sometimes the movie can be a little jittery though, because it wants to focus so much on that aspect of, you know, thought-provoking stuff, but sometimes it also wants to be an action movie, and sometimes it wants to go into the spectacle of things. And so it can be a little wavering when it comes to like executing that in the best way possible. Like, there's a moment in this where I was genuinely a little concerned because it felt like it was gonna become Elysium 2.0. Like, if you've seen Elysium, the first 2/3 of the movie, when you're dealing with all the stuff that's going on, it's working with the themes and the different, ideas of the story. But then the third act basically becomes a big action movie where Matt Damon has to kill Sharlto Copley and vice versa. There was a moment in here where I was worried that it might turn into the final act of that, and it somewhat corrects itself then. Now, it pulls a swing. Now, I'm curious as to how people are going to respond to that, but I think for the most part, the movie does manage to work in everything as best as possible. One of the minor gripes that I did have, however, was that it somewhat got a little creaky when it comes to fully just sort of, sticking to that focused path. Also, the subplot that you have with Allison Janney, who is someone trying to find Joshua and Alpha, and the stuff that's going on around that, I didn't really particularly care for. It's a side plot as side plots get. So, it's doing what it has to do. It's part of the bigger side narrative in regards to the distrust towards AI and, instead of finding a solution, trying to go for the next extreme. But that's all there is to that. Beyond those two couple of minor things, I love the creator. I've been thinking about this movie ever since I saw it a few days ago, and I can't wait to see it again. This is one of the best sci-fi movies I've seen this year. It's thought-provoking, it's very ambitious, it's very interestingly done. I'm looking forward to hearing what people have to say about it. Like I said, don't expect it to work for everybody. I think it does some things that are definitely going to be a little polarizing, but I can honestly say that I had an absolute blast with this movie, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Gareth Edwards pulls off next. I'm gonna give the creator a 9 out of 10. It's interesting. I already mentioned this. Like, it's nice to be in a time where, original sci-fi is happening, and we should celebrate that. It's just great, And there's always the bigger franchise movies for sure, and I'll always be excited for that. But it's always nice to have these moments where, you said the creative's voices come through. And I hope it succeeds because right now we need more of this. So if it does do well enough, if it at least makes, break even profit, then, we'll get more, hopefully. And that would be a very exciting thought. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Look forward to more videos very, very soon. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the movies. Did that? There we go.